Well, speaking of parenting gone wrong, we're going to take another dip into something a little heavier.
Yeah. Spicy.
We have to get spicy. I'm sorry. It just has to happen. And you, Brian, comment as much as you want or not. Of course, I understand where you sit. But I thought you would be a great person for this, not only because I love all your work, but because you're definitely on a different wavelength than some of us. And because of how you want to run your company, I thought you could bring a whole nother dimension to the conversation. And that's a huge compliment, by the way. I really respect you and how you kind of go about things. And, what I wanted to share was we all know what's been going on with politics in Washington with the Roe v. Wade stuff in the Supreme Court. There was talk or leaked documents about the Supreme Court overturning that decision and returning power to the states to make their own decisions on whether or not they wanted to keep, whether they wanted to allow abortion to happen in their locales. I think it's been sort of bastardized and twisted to make it seem like the federal government is trying to impose their will, but it's the exact opposite. But I think they're doing their damnedest to frame it in a really bad light. We had 3 conservative justices under Trump, and I think that they're using that as a way to score points with their base. And now I saw an article, and I'll share it with you guys here, an article from The Hill about how they're attempting to talk about expanding the courts once again, which I think it's important to really just talk about how this is not the answer to the problems right now, regardless of where you stand on all this stuff.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, they're trying to add more
justices.
Justice, yeah. They did it once. I don't remember how long ago, but
that makes zero sense, because the more voices you have as far as voting goes, the less things become decisive. Well,
it's so in this case. So with the Supreme Court, they want to add. I forget how many they want to add, but I think when Biden was first in office, they were talking about adding 3 or 4 more justices to it, so he could bring in more liberal justices. And I commented on this on Twitter, and I said, that the politicians continue to work for short-term gains, but fail to realize how detrimental it is to the long-term, lifespan of the court. Because like everything else, the pendulum shifts back and forth, right? You're going to have a conservative, a more conservative administration, and then it's going to go back, and you're going to have a more liberal, and it's just going to go bing, bing, bing. So this may work in their favor right now, and they think it's really good now, but 20, 30 years down the road, the tides are going to change. It's just not the way. And it just seems backwards that they think this one, removal of this one thing is somehow going to, well, I don't necessarily want to get into that. It's more of the packing the court thing that bothers me. They do not understand what this will do to them in the long term.
The thing that probably doesn't get talked about as much is, in order to pack the court, they have to do one thing, or they're talking about that they have to do one thing first, and that's remove the filibuster. To remove the filibuster would mean, basically people can't stave off or stop votes in the way they have in the past, a tactic which has been used quite considerably by the Democrats in the past, and the Republicans. I mean, one of the best people at it has been Rand Paul. But what they don't consider when they talk about removing the filibuster is what then happens the next time it turns around and there's a Republican majority, because you can't just put it back. It doesn't just come back because you're no longer in power. They don't ever think about what happens if this thing we do today falls in the hands of the people I disagree with tomorrow.
I agree.
And I mean, it's the same thing with the court. I mean, yeah, you put 4 liberal judges in now, but down the road, like you said, when it switches and you end up with another 4 conservatives, then you're right back to the same problem. What are you going to do? Just add more judges then? At what point do you realize that maybe that's not the best way to do things?
I think the concern is bigger than that to a degree. It's that the pendulum would get stuck and it would never swing back the other way. it would end up being the thing that finally destroys the system by implementing. And this, like, God, here's the thing that I hate. I hate that I can't talk about anything anymore without suddenly by the end of the conversation feeling like I'm a conspiracy theorist.
I know the feeling.
But like, it feels very much like we're on the edge of a totalitarian socialist state, potentially a Chinese run one, because God knows where the allegiance of our president lies. But that's the issue with any sort of corruption, is that corruption poisons everything. If I can't trust who you are, then what does it mean? And when Justice Roberts was influenced to change his vote on the Obamacare decision and to make a ruling that something was not a tax, or that something was a tax, when the only reason that it had been allowed was because it wasn't a tax. He was trying to thread the needle, and the court was kind of destroyed in a way at that moment, and was politicized to a degree where it couldn't ever be moved back from. And so him not acting up and doing the right thing and being influenced, or you can argue the right thing, but like, and I'm not even arguing against like government health. My thing at the end of the day is like, how are you going to pay for the damn thing? And like, I certainly have theories from an Austrian perspective. But if you look at people like Hayek and Mises, there were actually ways in which they were fairly liberal. They were not Republicans. I think that there was a method where if you could figure out how to pay for it, you could make the argument that makes sense. Yeah. My thing is that the way it was pushed through in the first place was abysmal, and it didn't follow our constitutional process. And all the Supreme Court makes decisions on is whether or not something follows the Constitution. And so even making a decision about Roe v. Wade, which, I was reading an article the other day from someone who was in law school at the time that it was announced, who said that, an overwhelming percentage of the legal community in the 70s when it was announced thought that it was a particularly horrible, like, argument for why it was allowed. And so we have had this, like, sort of, when something is corrupted or something is put into place in a semi-corrupt way, it's poisoned from that point on. And like, because Roe v. Wade wasn't put, if the Senate and the House, and they've had 40 years to put federal law into place to supersede this decision, had done that, it would be the way. But now everything hinges around this one thing and this one court, when there are plenty of other people in power who have control over it. And all they're making a decision on is whether it was constitutional. That it's not banning it. It's just saying that it's a state issue. And if the federal government wants to make a law, they can make a law. And that's the best way to go about it, because that way, at the end of it, there's going to be consensus, and it's not going to be something that was just brought about through thin air.
Right. Well, and someone in chat, I think it was Silvar, said, like, for a party that's pushing for a branch of the Homeland Security to be a ministry of truth, they're doing a really bang up job at spreading their own misinformation surrounding this whole thing. Because, like, again, painting this as federal restrictions on abortion is just an outright lie. Like, there's plenty, like, most of the states that, like, where most of these blue states or blue cities have no trigger laws surrounding abortion. They're just going to continue to be as they are, or was already legal before. Most of the places that don't want it will be well, I think they'll revert back to their original, like, ban on abortion, which that was made then. I'm sure they'll go through changes, in the coming years because of it. But the thing is too, I don't really know the nuance of these particular states. I know some of them allow for, I think there's a couple that basically like outright ban it across the board. But some that are just like, in case of emergency, if the mother's life is at risk, blah, blah, the normal stuff. But for the most part, like everyone still gets their way. It's just the government saying we're stepping out of this, like this is the Supreme Court saying this is unconstitutional. We're going to step back from this. You guys make the decision on what you think is best for your particular state. Everything. It just seems like a bunch of lies. And the article I have pulled up here seemed to sort of like, again, pull the mask back that, the leak was the potential to rewire the political landscape ahead of midterm elections in November, essentially because Democrats were losing favor of their base, since the progressives were sort of like, it was like splitting between the progressives and the classic liberals. It could displace inflation as the primary concern for voters, since suburban women are a key demographic that Democrats will likely target. It just seemed like hey, this is actually what we're doing, just so you know. And there's no surprise, but it's like they're they're pissing in our face and not even having the decency to call it rain. I don't know. It's just, again, it's more alarming things I see in the news that abortion is just a hot topic. It seems like every 2 or 3 years it kind of comes into the cycle, and then we all get outraged. But like you said, Brian, no one does anything or has done anything about it on a federal level and codified it into law. But all of a sudden, Senator Warren's, huffing and puffing, we need to go to work. You should have been working the past 30 years.
I hate that broad.
I am not a biologist and can't say whether or not I'm a woman, but I'm not a woman.
There you go.
But like, I don't know. The people who make the argument that, we need to have better family leave laws and forcing the father to be involved. I'm relatively on board with all of that. If you're going to make those decisions, like, I think that makes sense to certain people. What's interesting is I think that like you're going to see this law overturned before too long anyways, because at some point they're going to make the decision that it's the only way that they can make sure that there are babies being born into the country because there's population loss. Yeah, I mean, there's this conflict that can't be resolved because, like, on some level, the baby, even if it's not a baby, is at what point does someone have the right to exist? And do they have the right to exist at the expense of someone else? And there's no way to resolve that conflict without harming one person or another. Is it a greater harm for that person to never exist at all? I don't know. I don't know how you answer that. I mean,
even consider too, like the one thing that, again, for the party that likes to talk about the need for mental health and all that, we rarely talk about the effects of an abortion later on, like the regret that people have from doing them. Like even that's something that I think people need to consider, like, and how dangerous it is that we're using it as essentially a method of contraception, and not like, which that's like, they're using it as a way to escape parenthood, where like most rational people just say, I'll either use birth control, female birth control, or use condoms for men, or even, surgeries, that are technically reversible. But like, I think that's an important thing to think about, is that at some point down the line, you realize that what you did was give up the chance for motherhood. Even, you might not be ready in that moment, but 2 years down the line, when your life changes drastically, you're more independent, you find someone that you love. Oh crap. Like, did I just end a life? Like, was that, you start really evaluating what life means. And it's
my friend Lee posted a page from a Ron Paul book the other day that I thought was really interesting. Like he says, on one occasion in the 1960s, when abortion was still illegal, I witnessed, while visiting a surgical suite, an ob-gyn resident, the abortion of a fetus that weighed approximately 2 pounds. It was placed in a bucket, crying and struggling to breathe, and the medical personnel pretended not to notice. Soon, the crying stopped. This harrowing event forced me to think more seriously about this important issue. That same day, in the OB suite, an early delivery occurred and the infant born was only slightly larger than the one that was just aborted. But in this room, everybody did everything conceivable to save this child's life. My conclusion that day was that we were overstepping the bounds of morality by picking and choosing who should live and who should die. These were human lives, and there was no consistent moral basis to the value of life under these circumstances.
That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. My son was 2 pounds, 3 ounces when he was born. He could fit right here in my hand, right there. And for someone, for people to parade around and say that, you know, like I've heard a bunch of assholes on TikTok talk about, oh, well, life doesn't actually begin until 26 weeks. And I'm like, you're a monster. Like you know nothing of what you talk about. And I'm not even one to say like, you don't have a kid, so you don't understand. It's like, you just can't even you can't even pick up, or you can't even open a tab on Google to understand like, or what a child looks like at this point. And even at, I mean, dude, if it doesn't become real to you the first time you hear that like heartbeat at between 6 and 10 weeks, like I don't know what will convince you that that's life. I do not know.
What bothers me when it comes to stuff like this is, and this is a very weak, not a very weak position, but a weak position nonetheless, is these same people who are saying, yeet the fetus or abort the baby and all this other crazy stuff, is like, at one point in time, your parents took a chance on you. You made it this far, and you would at least have, like, if you're not planning to have kids yourself, at least have the common decency to not wish that on other people, not bring that same kind of ill will upon others, or even walk around as if that's what your modus operandi is in general, because there are other people out there who can't produce. There are people out there who are trying and, failing left and right. And this is no kept secret or anything like that. Nick Rekieta, for example, he was one, he and his wife, they were struggling for a while to have kids, and now they're 5 in. Congratulations to them. And would I bring that same kind of ill will upon people? No, I'm not walking around saying, hey, I hope your dreams and your goals and dreams just die because you have a kid or something like that. Or I'm not saying I wish you the best and hope that, like, you don't have a kid, or if you do have a kid, I hope they like die, or that's rude. Not just rude. It's disrespectful. It's inhumane. At the bare minimum, it's inhumane. Like, when you get to a point where you're saying stuff like that, I think you have this issue where you don't have a mirror in your house or anywhere near you where you can see a reflection of the monster that peers back at you. And that's just the way I see it.
Yeah.
Eric Valhalla is saying he doesn't understand why people don't understand that a fetus is just one of many stages into human development. To me, and then going through school, it seems to me we were never actually taught any of that. So I feel like today so many people don't understand the process of procreation, even though they're supposedly teaching sexual education in schools. Sexual education now seems more about having sex and less about what sex is for. So people don't have that understanding or connection to the idea that thing growing inside of a woman is in fact an actual human being. She was just talking about Nick Rekieta, and Nick's always talking about the fact that every baby, every fetus is going to become a human. It's not going to become a cat. It's not going to become a dog. It's not going to be a porpoise.
Are you
98% sure. I'm 98% sure. I'm not a biologist, but there is a biologist in the chat. Dave will back me up on this.
Okay.
Sometimes people get it wrong.
You're right. Sometimes they do get it wrong.
I mean, there are people who enjoy laying with animals, which is
yeah, I've read some.
Hey, look, squids are hot, all right.
Stay away from a play called Equus.
Yeah.
I did kind of want to finish up everything that we've talked about tonight. I mean, it sort of just leads back to the this whole Supreme Court thing and Roe v. Wade, and this Amorata, you wanted me to put this up here and you want to chat about it, but I saw this as well today. I don't know if I shared this or what, but it was just seems like more ways, and I don't even know if this could be a parody account. Quite honestly, at this point, I don't even know.
I didn't look. I probably should have, but still.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just seems like throwing people in boxes and just I don't know.
I mean, it makes so many assumptions.
Yeah,
I know people who go to church who believe in abortion. I know people who have guns who believe in abortion. I know people who are quote woke and don't. I am a part of an interracial couple and I do not. People who are LGBT whatever, and they have varying ideas. To try to say that any one of these groups absolutely believes one way or the other is one of those things that I look at it and it makes me angry, because all it does is serve to further divide people by shoving them in the boxes we were talking about earlier.
Right. Yeah, it depresses me when I see stuff like this, because like you said, it makes assumptions about all these groups that all these groups are a monolith of their own and they all think the same way, which is just stupid at this point. I think if anything, the past 5 years have really showed us that there's so many different groups of people and they all have different experiences and think differently. It's one of the things that sort of pulled me out of my own wokeness, seeing people like Eric July and Gothics, and then I started reading Soul and stuff, all that stuff sort of pulled me out, oh wait, not everyone thinks the exact same. And it I was addicted to hearing conservative voices because I didn't understand them the way I thought I did. For a long time you're just told this side good, this side bad, that's it. And this is how people think on that side, the
right.
hardcore progressives. This is how they almost all think. They can't read between the lines. And it's really sad. And I don't think this person represents any sort of majority group necessarily, but it's weird to see this sort of thing. And, I don't know, it got a lot of, they got ratioed to but it's still 93 likes. I hope those are ironic. Likes. I hope it's not
Is it anything different though than the adrenaline of Chappelle and his crew as they're attacking the guy who attacked him?
Right.
Probably not.
Yeah, probably not.